Hello. Today, for this virtual classroom, I wanted to talk about a topic that's very interesting to me and I think useful to know, which is about the science behind survival. There's lots of different kinds of survival. We survive every day. What if you were in a situation that kind of takes you out of your comfort zone? We live in a world where food is available to us pretty much all the time. We have lots of choices to make. We're lucky that way. But what if that were taken away? How many of us could actually survive if food trucks didn't bring in food to the grocery stores every day? How long could we survive? What if we lost our shelter? What if we weren't guaranteed clean water every time you turn on the faucet? So people have come up with what they call rule of threes for survival. And the rule of threes says that you can survive for 3 minutes without air. You can survive for 3 hours without shelter. And I know you're thinking, I've been outside much longer than 3 hours and I came out just fine. We're talking about more extreme situations. A cold, rainy day, if it's snowing outside and you have nothing on but the clothes on your back. You can live for 3 days without water, and it's not a good 3 days. You get thirsty real fast. Your body requires a lot of water for the chemistry that makes life possible. And after 3 days, it would be bad. And you can live for 3 weeks without food. Again, very quickly you'll get hungry. Most of us get pretty hungry by the end of the day. I'm talking 21 days without food would be survivable, but would not be fun. So let's go through each of these and look at the science behind surviving. So the first thing is 3 minutes without air, which is basically try not to drown. That's usually the situation where lack of air is a problem. Maybe you can't swim. And you might think if you get thrown overboard, you don't have a life preserver, you're doomed. Keep something in mind. Air floats on water. Things that have air in them float on water. That's how a lot of flotation devices work. They're full of air. You are made of bone, flesh, blood. Those things tend to be denser than water. And so without any air in your body, you will sink. But there's no reason there shouldn't be any air in your body. Take a big mouthful, take a big lungful of air, and you will float. Now, you don't float all that great. If you're standing up in the water, and water's about up above your eyes and everything, okay, you can't breathe there. But that's not the idea. The idea is not to sink. So take a big breath of water, put your face back in, hold your arms out, and you're floating. You're not sinking. Of course, you can only do that for a certain amount of time before you have to take another breath of air. And that's where you push your arms down, tread a little bit of water, put your face out, blow out the bad air, suck in the good air, repeat. Go back to step number one. Most people drown in surprisingly shallow amounts of water, maybe just 8 or 9 feet, which doesn't sound like much, but of course, you're not 9 or 10 feet tall, so it's enough. But if you can float, eventually someone will come to get you. And let's say you can't swim, but you can float. Now, while you're floating, kick your feet, move your arms a little bit like this. Guess what? You're swimming. You're not setting any Olympic records. You're swimming. Maybe you can get to something that can help you survive, get to the shoreline, for example. But even if not, just keep on floating until someone comes and gets you. The reason people drown is often they panic. When you panic, you're yelling for help, you're letting the air out of your lungs, you're waving your arms around, you're sinking. Now you start getting mouthfuls of water, and things can go badly very quickly. Don't panic. And doing this, just this floating thing, how about this? Float on your back. If you float on your back, your face up, you can just keep breathing normally. Just most of the time, make sure your lungs are full of air. Now, be very careful about rescuing someone else who's drowning because they will tend to grab onto you, and that can be hard to swim. The best thing to do would be to throw them a rope or something, then have them grab onto that, and then you pull them in. Don't let them grab onto you and pin your arms down. But it's a real tragedy how many people every year we lose in situations that weren't necessary. So that's air. I think we all understand that. Now, the shelter bit And I said to you, we've all been outside for more than 3 hours, but there's a basic rule in the universe. And it states this: if there are two objects, one of them is hot and one of them is less hot, and they're touching each other, heat will go from the hot object into the less hot one. Now, they both have heat, but the hotter one is the one that will be losing the heat. If you have, for example, two bricks here, the red one is hot, the blue one is less hot. If they touch each other, heat will flow from the red into the blue, and this will continue until they are the same temperature. You are 98.6 degrees. You are probably one of the hotter things walking around outside. The ground is not that hot. Unless it's a very hot day, the air is not that hot. Heat is always leaving your body. You lie down on the ground, let's say the ground is 70 degrees. That doesn't sound that bad. Or if you're in 70-degree water, that would actually be kind of warm, but heat is being pulled out of you. You can't afford to lose very many degrees before, yeah, things go wrong. So shelter is important. This is especially true if it's cold, because once you get wet, this process goes much faster. And by shelter, I'm not talking about anything fancy. Well, first of all, one thing, there's three ways that heat can leave your body. There's conduction, where you touch something that's hot and heat goes into you, or in this case, you touch something cold and heat leaves your body. There's convection, which is less important for what we're talking about here. Hot air rises, hot liquids rise. And then there's radiation. Now, radiation is not the kind of radiation we talked about yesterday, not nuclear radiation. This means that heat goes in all directions from hot up. You don't want to be lying on the ground. The ground is cold and it will conduct the heat out of your body. But you got to lie on something. Better than the ground would be like a pile of leaves. Leaves trap a lot of air, and that's less likely to pull heat out of your body. Air is not a good conductor of heat the way dirt or rocks are. So a big pile of leaves on the ground, even just lying on a pile of sticks, not comfortable, but would conduct less heat out of your body. You also are losing heat by radiation, but if we can create like a little cocoon that could trap that heat, then you'll be warmer. Your body's going to be constantly pushing out heat. Let's trap it in there. So this is what they call a debris shelter. It's just a bunch of sticks stacked against each other with enough space that you can get in there. And then you cover it with as much debris, mostly leaves and sticks and twigs, as you can. About 3 feet of leaves means even if it starts raining, it will not get to you. That would not be the most comfortable sleep you've ever had, but you would wake up the next morning. This can be even simplified. Something like a tarp would keep the rain from getting to you, and then a pile of leaves on the bottom would give you something to lie on. Again, this is not going to be a good night's rest, but you'll get up in the morning. Now you might ask, wait a minute, aren't the leaves the same temperature as the ground? And yeah, they are. But because leaves trap so much air, and wood in general is not a great conductor, this will not pull the heat out of your body as fast. You can see the reverse of this too. People who burn, they start fires, they get a bunch of hot coals, and then they walk across it. I've done this. I don't recommend this. It can go wrong. But if you keep a good pace and there's no rocks or metal in there, it hurts, but it doesn't necessarily burn you. You got to be moving fast. And these things are hot. I mean, that is red hot. You could be cooking hot dogs over this. The only reason it doesn't burn you is because wood's not a great conductor of heat. So as long as you move quickly and walk the correct way, you won't get too much heat going into your feet. Now, to prevent radiation from working against you, they have these things, these thermal blankets. They are silver mylar, kind of made out of the same thing as balloons. And they say they reflect about 99% of all the heat that comes out. And that's pretty impressive. I have used these. They are uncomfortable, noisy. They are waterproof. So if you're sitting there in the rain, at least the parts covered in this blanket will be protected against the water. And they do reflect heat pretty well. I think people overestimate how effective they are, though, because although they are good at reflecting back radiation, if you if you're sitting on snow with one of these blankets, heat is still being conducted through the blanket into the snow. They're not a cure-all for everything, but they're cheap, a buck or so a piece. I like to put a few of these in the glove compartment of my car. If for whatever reason I'm trapped in the car there and it's a cold night, this would be a good thing to wrap around me. If I see an accident outside, this could be something that could be useful for the survivors, help keep them warm until help gets there. They even sell emergency tents that are basically that material on the inside. So again, waterproof, which is probably the best thing about them. They're waterproof. So if you're getting rained on, this would protect you. The amount of how warm you're going to be in there, you're not going to be very warm. It's just one of the other problems about these. Yes, they're waterproof, but if you wrap yourself, especially if you cover your head with it as you're breathing, water from your mouth is going to get trapped in there, and then the inside starts dripping with condensation. And when your clothes get wet, you get colder. These can also work in the opposite direction. If you're, let's say you have a tent and it's blazing hot outside, inside your tent's going to be miserable. One thing to help would be to put one of these on top and reflect the sun away. So if I were walking in the desert, I'd want one of these blankets not to keep me warm, but to reflect away the sun, keep me a little cool. One of the best ways you can do this is, again, using science. You have a fire in front of you. That's going to keep the front of you warm. Your back is freezing cold. But if you have one of these blankets and you set it up so that the radiated heat from the fire bounces off of the mylar blanket here and then comes back to you, essentially you're getting heated on both sides now. And if you take it one step further, and you'd have to be awfully prepared to do this. Most people don't go walking through the woods expecting to be lost and expecting that they're going to have to do this. But if you could put a plastic sheet in front of you, now you've created a greenhouse. These people, this is what they call the super shelter. It can get up to 85 degrees or more inside the shelter, even though it's freezing outside, even though it's below freezing. They have a big fire set up, a long fire. The radiation is going through the plastic, bouncing off the mylar blanket, and getting trapped in there. And you can be surprisingly warm. Again, the biggest problem is inside here, you're still breathing out water vapor, and water's going to start condensing in here, and you might wake up soaked. I don't know if there's a solution to that problem, but as a way to survive one bad night of very cold weather, very effective. Well, that's shelter. What about water? This looks good. Look at that water. Nice, crystal clear mountain lake. This is water probably from melted snow, even in the summertime. It's great stuff. I would not drink it. Now, this was brought home to me when I went to my sister's place, and her gorgeous mountain stream, just beautiful clear water. It was tempting to take a drink from it, but I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't, because we walked up a couple hundred yards and there was a dead deer sitting in the middle of the water, just disintegrating. Anyone drinking that water is drinking dead deer soup. It's full of bacteria, viruses, who knows what. It's very dangerous. Don't do it. Don't ever drink water sources unless you absolutely have to. I mean, if you're dying of thirst, of course, you're going to drink whatever water you can find. I wouldn't recommend it, especially when there's so many easy solutions. You can buy now these water straws, which you can drink nasty water. And although it won't taste good, 99.9% of all the bacteria and viruses have been filtered out. You could even make your own by peeling a branch the right size, enough to fit into, say, a water bottle. Hopefully, if you went hiking in the woods, you did bring at least one water bottle. Fill it full of pond water, stuff this in there. It's got to be airtight, and then just let the water filter through the branch. And it will go through the branch. This is how plants are able to have water travel up. But most of the bad stuff will be filtered out. And they've tested this, and it's amazing just how clean it makes the water. Similar to that is what they call the coyote hole, where you find a source of water, say a river, a stream. You find some land not too far away from the water, dig a big, big hole, and over time you'll see it fill up with water. That's water that's gone through the dirt. You might think, well, that's kind of going to be dirty water. Dirt if it's deep enough, it doesn't really have that many bad things in it. What makes water dangerous to drink is dead leaves, dead animals, dead fish, all that dead stuff there. There really isn't any of that deep in the ground. So that water is surprisingly clean. Would I drink it? Not. And if I had to drink from pond or something, and ponds are pretty nasty, you want to collect the water up at the top. The reason for this is ultraviolet radiation from the sun. The top part of the water is getting most of the radiation, and that's killing a lot of the bacteria. These two water bottles here, this one, they both were collected from water in a pond. This was left in the shade. This was left out in the sun. And just the sun going through the plastic, you can see, killed a lot of the stuff that makes the water cloudy. But all of these I would still not drink unless I first boiled it. Hopefully, you have the material to start a fire and boil some water. If not, find yourself a stump or something that can hold water. Make a fire, get a bunch of rocks nice and hot, drop them in. And when the water is boiling, it pretty much has killed everything there. That water would be as close to safe to drinking as you're likely to get. Might not be a bad idea to carry some of these tablets, which are just sort of like the same chemicals that you have in tap water that makes it possible to drink water from the sink without getting sick. So water, there's different ways that you can find water sources that can be safe. Um, Food. Can I eat these? Well, as a wise man once said, all fungi, mushrooms, are edible, but some are only edible once. If you don't know what you're doing, don't eat wild mushrooms. I would want to have an expert in wild mushrooms with me and a book that I could refer to, and I still wouldn't want to eat them unless I had no choice and I was starving, because there's some out there that are incredibly poisonous. Again, you can live for 3 weeks without food. You get lost in the woods. Someone's going to find you in 3 weeks, right? I mean, you did tell people you were going out hiking, right? I hope. There's some food you might be able to find that's safe, like berries. If you know what raspberries look like, there aren't any poisonous ones that I know of. It would definitely have to be something that I'm familiar with. And yeah, you can eat bugs, most bugs. It's not going to be pleasant. Worms, pound for pound, more protein than steak, but no one's ever talked about how good it tastes. I think I'd take my chances more with something like acorns. Now, most acorns are not edible right off the ground. When you find them, crack them open, take a bite, it's bitter. There's some acids and toxins and stuff in there that just aren't very good. So the thing to do would be to grind them up into just meal, put them in a thing of water, boil it, pour off the water. The water's probably going to be brown looking, more water in there. Do this a bunch of times until the water that gets poured off is clean. And then try eating them. And they probably won't taste like very much, but at least they don't taste bitter anymore. With plants, there is a scientific method to figuring out if something you have is edible or not. First thing you do, separate the plants into all its components, leaves, stems, roots, because some plants have edible parts and poisonous parts. I'd pick the part that looks like it'll give you the most bang for the buck. Most seeds are pretty small, not really worth going after. Take it and rub it against your wrist. It's a sensitive part of your arm. And then wait, see what happens. Does your wrist turn red? Does it blister? Does it turn numb? Okay, these are not things you want to have inside you. If it's possible, cook the parts, because a lot of plants, like potatoes, for example, are actually kind of poisonous if you eat them raw. But if you cook them, they're fine. They're good for you. So that's just a much better idea. Cooking destroys a lot of poisons. Next thing you do, take the part of the plant, if it doesn't hurt your wrist, against your lips. Wait 15 minutes. Again, no reaction. Go the next step. This is where you take a bite, chew it, probably spit it out. Does your mouth go dry? Did it taste bitter or soapy? Now, remember when we talked about acids and bases? A lot of foods are acid, very few are base. A lot of poisons are base. So if you taste something that's bitter and soapy, that's a base. And given how many poisons are basic, I'd stop at that point. And then the very last, if everything else has worked, go to take a small bite, chew it up, swallow, and then wait 8 hours. And hopefully you don't get sick to your stomach or get diarrhea or have hallucinations or any of the other things that might happen. If you do, obviously this was not a plant you want. Now you can see this is a long process, and you would have to do this for each thing individually. So, not a situation you want to get into. Might not be a bad idea to get yourself one of those little books on edible plants of whatever part it is you're traveling through and slip that into your backpack there. Just get to know just a few plants there. And again, I'm hoping you're not having to survive 21 days before someone comes and gets you. There's a lot of stuff out there on YouTube about survival. It's become very popular. I'm not sure why it suddenly has. I guess when people feel a little insecure about the way the world is going, they start wondering, could I make it on my own? The answer for most people is probably not. But here's what I would say. If I'm going in the woods, I'm going fishing, you never know what could happen. You might get lost. You might get injured, and you're just going to have to spend some time out there by yourself. Your phone doesn't work. It never works when you need it. So, what are the things you want to take with you? I can't take too much. You're not going to be walking around with 100 pounds of stuff on your back. You know, you didn't plan on camping there, so I don't expect you brought a tent. But one guy came up with what he called the 10 C's of survival: a cutting tool, a knife of some kind, or maybe something more elaborate like a handsaw, something portable, but something that could get you cut a lot of things. There's a lot of uses for that. Combustion device, in other words, a way to start fire. And let's not get fancy. Yeah, you can make fire by rubbing two sticks together from friction, but most people can't do that. A lighter is just fine. Some kind of coverage, some small plastic part, anything that could cover you. Doesn't have to be big and elaborate. The bigger the better, but the bigger the heavier too. Container of some kind, a canteen, a cup, something that can be used to transfer water back and forth. If it's something you could use to boil water, all the better. Cordage, rope. Yeah, you can make it out of tree bark and things, but paracord doesn't cost very much, doesn't take up much space, and man, you can use it in a lot of ways. Cotton bandana. This is a strange one, sort of a piece of cloth of some kind. It's just got a lot of uses, even if it's just putting it around your head and using it as an emergency tourniquet or bandage. Cargo duct tape, also good for bandage, and 101 other uses. It's just I've seen people make canoes out of duct tape. A compass, but this is only useful if you know what you're doing. A compass without a map is not very useful. Sure, it tells you where north is, but is north the way you want to go? Without a map, you don't know which way you're going. You could keep going north until you hit Canada. Here in North Carolina, I'd head east, probably. If I had no other idea what to do, I'd head east because I know I'm going to hit the ocean and you hit some houses before you get to the ocean. Um, Cloth sail needle, that's kind of an odd one. I'm thinking this is a needle used for sewing. That would be for repairs, stitches if you got injured. And number 10, a handling device, by which they mean a flashlight or a headlamp or something. If without light, when it gets dark, and it gets dark pretty early in the woods, you're useless. You don't want to be stumbling around the dark. It's bad to be lost in the woods. It's worse to be lost in the woods with a broken leg or even just a twisted ankle. You're not going to be able to do very much. So that's some of the basics there. You can see there's a lot of science behind this. And if we go back and look at our rules again, rules of three, they've added a few here. 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, 3 months without a companion. We're social creatures. It's not easy to live on our own. Even those of us who like being loners and everything, there's usually at least a few friends, people. Without that, you start losing touch. If you saw the movie Castaway, Tom Hanks is stranded on a desert island. He takes a soccer ball, paints a face on it, and talks to it because otherwise he'd go crazy, crazier than a guy talking to a soccer ball. And then I think the most important one, 3 seconds without hope. That doesn't mean you're going to die after 3 seconds, but if you don't have hope, it's just a matter of time. Hope is what keeps you going, even when logic and reason might say there's no way out of this. And there are so many great stories of people who are in absolutely hopeless situations, and yet they survive. And why they survive? Because they believe they would. And that belief kept them going. Don't lose hope. Life can throw a lot of things at you, and it can seem overwhelming. Now, the one time where it would be fatal, if you felt like you were drowning and you panicked and you lost all hope, yeah, it's game over at that point. Calming down, remembering, wait, I can float. Let's float. Let me float for a bit. Float, calm down, get your heart rate down. When your heart rate goes down, you don't need as much air. Now, what's the next step? One thing at a time, one goal at a time. Don't focus on the fact, you know, people who've been lost and no one knew where they were in the middle of nowhere. Nobody's looking for them. If they keep thinking about that, they're just going to give up. They just make one goal at a time. Okay, what do I do for the next hour? Where am I going to find water? What kind of food might there be here? They're going through the different stages, attacking the ones that they need first. And by doing that, keeping themselves going, they survive. And eventually it worked out. Hope is critical. Now, for your assignment, there's a really cool show called Alone. It's on History Channel where for something like $1 million, they take these people and they drop them in the middle of like a Canadian forest in the winter. There's grizzly bears and wolverines and all kinds of scary things out there. They are allowed to bring 10 things, 10 easily carryable things in a backpack out there. Besides the shirt on their back, 10 things like a handsaw would be a thing, an axe would be a thing. They can bring up to like 2 pounds of food, which not a bad idea, but it won't last you very long. When these folks, and the winner was one, the longest winner was a guy who lasted 100 days alone. Most of these people lose 30, 50. I think one guy lost 70 pounds. Um, yeah, 2 pounds of food's not going to do it for you. Keep in mind, you got to eat 10 pounds of food to gain 1 pound of weight. So, yeah, you couldn't carry the amount of water you would need for a few days or the amount of food you would need for a few weeks. You're going to have to find your own there. So, here's your goal. Give me your list of the 10 things that you would take if you had to survive in the wilderness for $1 million. You got to expect you're going to be out there for at least 50 days, which is longer than you can't just go without food or water or shelter for anywhere near that time. What are the 10 things you would bring? And these, the rules are, it can't be anything that, you can't just bring a cell phone, have somebody Uber in food whenever you get hungry. You're out there, you're isolated. What would you bring that would help you build shelter, get water, collect food, maybe keep your mind occupied? Um, what would it be? I'm interested. I mean, there's no real right or wrong answers, and you can look up on the Alone website what other people have chosen. They don't all pick the same thing, the winners. Um, anyway, hopefully this will never happen. And let me give one word of advice so that you never have to worry about this. If you're going fishing or hiking or going to go out camping in the woods because it's cool or whatever, tell people tell people where you're going. If you change your mind at the last minute, you go out fishing, but the fish aren't biting, so you think, maybe I'll go try the Haw River or the Deep River or, Neuse River or something. Tell somebody that you've done this. And it's got to be someone you trust, not someone who's going to be like, yeah, 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 whatever, forget. Make sure you know. So if you don't come back that night or the next day, they know where to send people to go looking for you. And North Carolina is a big place. There's a lot of places you could have gone. Don't count on your phone. Your phone could break. Your phone could be in a place where there's no reception. The battery could go out. There's a lot of things that could happen. Tell someone so that we know where to go looking for you. And you'll have one good story to tell when it's all over. So there you are. Just give me that list of 10 things. Make sure your name's on it. Post that in there. And I will see you all tomorrow. Take care.